US President Joe Biden claims Russia is looking to fabricate a reason to invade Ukraine and launch an attack. NATO is warning there is no sign of de-escalation in the tensions. People in Ukraine have been living in constant fear of an invasion. Peter Stefanovic spoke with an Australian photojournalist and documentary filmmaker, Bryce Wilson, this week. He's been living in Ukraine for the past 8 years.
Since I arrived, I've been traveling around throughout Ukraine, made interviews with people in Kiev, made interviews with people in Kramatorsk. Only a few days ago, I was in the south of the country attending a civil training event where a local military force tasked with defending one of the cities was teaching people how to do first aid training, operate and clean weapons, live in times of war. It seems like people are calm, but there's definitely been a noticeable shift over the last 3 to 4 days, and I think it's becoming somewhat real. And even with the Russian government talking about moving forces away from the border, US intelligence seems to suggest that that's not actually the case, and more forces are moving to the border.
So how is that changing people's habits?
Well, that's a really good question, because after living with Russia's war in the Donbas for 8 years nearly at this point, people have become somewhat accustomed to living in wartime. But recently what we have seen is during the week, people go to work, and then on weekends they go to gatherings with military veterans and forces where they learn skills, how to survive, like I said, during wartime. I think people are preparing bags in case they need to evacuate. People are thinking, what would I do if war came to Ukraine? Because in the far west of the country, which is sort of a Melbourne to Sydney type distance away from where the current war is, I think people in Kiev are starting to appreciate and understand that war could come to their doorstep too. It won't just be localized to the east.
Are you seeing much in the way of military hardware around the streets, even though you're a bit away from it? Are you seeing much in the way of that? Even tanks, perhaps, people in military fatigues? Well, give us a sense of what you're seeing.
Kramatorsk is actually very close to the front line, and to the best of my knowledge, I'm probably the most easternmost reporter that's in Ukraine from Australia at the moment. So it's very normal here to see soldiers especially, but closer to the front line, yes, you will observe regular rotations of troops. Train stations here are hubs for movement of armoured vehicles. There has not been a significant increase in internal movement of forces in this area. I know that in Kiev, the Ukrainian armed forces are preparing to defend the city to the north, where the border with Belarus is. If you look for these little signs, you definitely see them in the areas where I think the government is recognizing that they're more prone to attack. But in the Donbas, for example, closer to the border where the current conflict is, there are tiers of defenses. You will regularly see a lot of soldiers, military equipment. In Donetsk Oblast, that's become a normal part of life.
Is there a feeling that Ukraine's forces are not going to be any match for Russian forces if they do decide to cross the border? Do you feel that on the ground when you're talking to locals?
In my experience, having covered this for 7 years at this point, the Ukrainian armed forces have undergone massive reform in many cases because they're trying to become closer to NATO. They have undergone massive training. They have been supplied equipment. The feeling that I get from speaking to people is that to them, they believe unquestionably that they would overcome any attack on Ukraine. The military believes it has the support of the civilians who are ready to take up arms, and vice versa. So every conversation I have with people, it almost seems like a predetermined thing for them that they would not be defeated, that Ukraine wouldn't fall to invasion. But they also recognize that such a another invasion of Russian forces would be a catastrophic event for the country, obviously. And war is brutal, especially in urban environments. And,
Yeah.
you know, even with a valiant defense, there would be incredibly high costs.